elders, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, Assalamu alaikum. That bloody woman sent us in the wrong direction, which is why my wife and I were late in arriving. I refer, of course, to that bloody woman on our sat-nav, but it is a tidy metaphor for that other bloody woman whose demise has, you'll forgive the pun, resurrected all of the feelings that existed in this country during our period in office, 10 long and bitter years, in which Britain was taken in entirely the wrong direction. And I'm going to, as I think my sister Yvonne did, devote some of what I have to say to the issues that are raised by the demise of Margaret Thatcher. Not because I want to dance on her grave. I wish that she'd never been born. I hated her what seems like all of my life. I didn't respect her in life. It would be rank hypocrisy to pretend to respect her in death. But if she was now a mere waxwork in Madame Tussauds, there wouldn't be much to talk about. A historical figure, lived and died, move on. The problem is that Thatcher is dead, but Thatcherism lives. That's the problem. That's why I have had so much to say since Monday afternoon. It has been an incredible few days. On Monday afternoon, moments after her death was announced, I tweeted a single line, "Tramp the Dirt Down," which was the title of a song by Elvis Costello almost 30 years before, when in a song he looked forward to this day when he could tramp the dirt down just to make sure she didn't get up again. That one line put me on Sky News, BBC News, and in all the worst newspapers. There was a ferocious onslaught from the right, from parliamentarians and others, including many Labour parliamentarians and figures. It was a difficult few hours, but I knew that by the next day a backlash in Britain would have begun against the attempt by the state and by the Tory party and by our new Labour heirs and successors to pour honeyed words, lies actually, on her record and what it meant for Britain. And so it has happened. The end result, this is Saturday, that was Monday. The number of people following me on Twitter is now 123,000. The number of people following me on Facebook is now 107,000. I now have 30,000 videos on YouTube with more than 50 million views, and Respect has gained more than 500 members in 5 days. That all indicates to me that though I might have been the first to speak out and speak the truth about Margaret Thatcher on her demise, I certainly have not been the last. And that dam having been broken by us, through it have poured millions. The Football Association did not dare follow the plans, or rather the pleas, of people who should know better. In one case, Sir Bobby Charlton,
a man from the northeast of England, from a small mining village called Easington, which is a ghost town ever since Thatcher was in power. But Charlton and Majeski, the chairman of Reading, and the fellow who's the chairman of Wigan, another ghost town, desertified by Thatcher, all called on the Football Association to make every football team hold a minute's silence today for the death of Margaret Thatcher. But by today, the Football Association could not have dared to have done so, because every football stadium would have been filled with anger and derision at the idea that we should honour somebody who did so much to tear apart that which remained good about our country, and whose shadow, long shadow, has cast millions of people into unemployment, poverty, child poverty, hopelessness. Somebody asked me on the TV the other day, well, it's going out tomorrow on Yorkshire, BBC, what do you think the legacy of Margaret Thatcher has been for Yorkshire? I said, needles, drugs, crime, idleness, vice, and division. That's what she brought to Yorkshire, and as Yvonne was just saying to you when I came in, she did the same for all of what is now, thanks to her, post-industrial Britain. If you'll forgive me, my wife can testify, as I was driving to Bradford this morning in the very early morning, I actually shed a tear at the driving wheel. I almost had to stop the car because I drove past the National Coal Mining Museum. It's now the National Coal Mining Museum. When Thatcher came to power, it was one of the most important, largest and richest coal fields on the planet. Britain had 1,000 years of coal under our feet. Britain is built on coal. And Thatcher destroyed all of it. And I shed a tear because this industry, these men and their families and their communities, their union, meant everything to me. One of the proudest things I have is my honorary membership of the National Union of Mine Workers, given to me in South Wales in 1983, just before the 12-month miners' strike began. And like some others in this room, I fought that strike myself every single day, as if I had been a miner myself. Not just because I loved these communities with their brass bands and their pageants and their miners' galas and their sense of solidarity, looking after each other, caring about each other's parents, caring about each other's children, not just because of that, but because I knew that if Thatcher managed to destroy an organisation so powerful as the National Union of Mine Workers, that everyone else would prove to be easy meat and would be chopped up one after the other, leaving Britain's workforce defenceless against the free market, Thatcherite economic policies which she pursued and have been pursued ever since. And that's exactly what happened. Once she defeated the miners, she closed the steel works. Once she closed the steel works, she broke the print workers. Then the car workers. Many of you are old enough to remember a time when all around us, here and abroad, you could see the things of Britain's manufacture. Us, once the workshop of the world, the first industrial country in the world, once upon a time dug coal, made steel, made cars, trucks, buses, motorcycles. We made ships of steel when the Americans were still cowboys, which sailed the 7 seas, laden with the manufactures made here, especially here in the Midlands. That's what made Birmingham great. That's what made Birmingham what they called the second city of the empire. Much of the empire has come to Birmingham, I'm very glad to say, to repay them for their crimes during that era. That's what made Birmingham great. That you made things that other people had to use now. In parenthesis, I was on this BBC Yorkshire programme for Tomorrow Asked, well, these are traditional industries. What does that mean? Don't we use cars anymore? Don't we use steel anymore? Don't we have to consume energy anymore? If you go outside now and look around you, everything you see was made by somebody. It just was no longer made here. Thatcher destroyed more than 35% of our manufacturing capacity. Hitler and his Luftwaffe, in the long years of the Blitz, never came close to that level of destruction. And Hitler's destruction could be rebuilt. Thatcher's destruction was permanent. Once you flood a coal mine, once you allow a furnace to die, it can never be reopened or reignited. And the result was UB40. For many younger people, that's just a very, very good Birmingham music ensemble, one of the greatest you ever produced. But why were they called UB40? Because that was the number of the unemployment benefit form. UB, unemployment benefit 40. And millions had to sign on that UB40 dotted line. And millions of others, by the way, I just remember this today. Now the Tories have put Atos in charge of turfing people out of their wheelchairs, driving the sick out of their beds to go and look for non-existent work. Who created the disability living allowance? Thatcher did. Why? To get people off the unemployment figures onto the sickness benefit and disability figures. Because the numbers of people unemployed was climbing million after million after million. And even she could see the danger in that. And so the unemployed were divided into those unable to find work because they were sick, and those unable to find work because there was no work. And then they were encouraged to hate each other. And those in work were encouraged to hate the unemployed, whether able or disabled. And those working in the private sector were encouraged to hate those working in the public sector, who were somehow described as parasites on those working in the private sector. And so, we began to see the divisions in our society, which continue to this day. She divided white people against black and Asian people, talking about Britain being swamped by you, most of you. She tried to fool the poor, white, working people into believing they wouldn't be so poor and they wouldn't be unemployed if it wasn't for that black family, that Asian family living down the road. This is the kind of people they were, even in their own country. If you look at what they did in other people's countries, I'd be here all night. In Ireland under Thatcher, a systematic program of state involvement in the murder of Catholics was embarked upon. One of them was my friend, the Belfast solicitor, Patrick Finucane, murdered in front of his wife and 2 small children at his dinner table after Sunday Mass in the local Roman Catholic church. His door was smashed in. He was riddled with bullets. His wife was shot whilst trying to defend him. His children traumatized, small children, traumatized for the rest of their lives. This murder was organised by Margaret Thatcher's agents, as David Cameron himself had to admit at the dispatch box when he delivered the Da Silva report just a couple of months ago. He offered an apology to the Finucane family for the role played by British soldiers, Special Forces, MI5 and the Special Branch played in the murder of Patrick Finucane, and scores of others who were murdered by British agents operating in conjunction and collaboration with loyalist murder gangs. And of course, when the Irish political prisoners in the north of Ireland went on hunger strike in the early 1980s to restore political status to themselves as prisoners so that they would not be treated as common criminals. And how could they be common criminals? They were imprisoned without charge, without trial, without limit of time, in a cage, in the H blocks, now demolished, but forever visible for people of my age in our minds. They weren't common criminals. If they were, they'd have been tried, convicted, served their sentences and been out. But they were held without charge, without trial, and without limit of time. So when they struck to get their political status back, Thatcher effectively murdered them one by one. And what an irony that she died on the anniversary of the leading hunger striker Bobby Sands' election to Parliament from his deathbed. Bobby Sands, MP, was elected on the very day, 30 years before, that Thatcher died. 10 of them died in this brute period. And when I wrote about it on my blog and made a video of it, which has just gone out on YouTube, I didn't know the worst of it. Somebody has now leaked a document published in The Guardian, I think this morning, which shows that Thatcher had a plan which she called the Cromwell Plan, back to Oliver Cromwell, of, by one means or another, ethnically cleansing the north of Ireland, driving the Catholic minority out of Northern Ireland and into Southern Ireland, and thus solving at a stroke the problem of the political mess that the creation of the so-called province of Northern Ireland had created. Thatcher's relations overseas, again I could take all night to talk about them. Her best friend in Latin America was the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, who came to power, murdering the elected president Salvador Allende, murdering members of parliament in the parliament building. The president was murdered in the president's palace. Thousands were rounded up and taken to football stadia, tortured and murdered, and hundreds of thousands were scattered across the earth as refugees where they lived for the next 30 years. That was Thatcher's best friend in Latin America. Suharto in Indonesia, where my wife comes from, one of the biggest thieves and certainly one of the biggest murderers in history. He murdered 4 million Indonesians when he came to power. 4 million! Thatcher was best buddies with Suharto, selling him weapons, doing deals, coming up to him at every opportunity. But there was one great figure overseas that Thatcher could not bear to look at. And I was there. I saw her lips moving. I heard her say it when she described Nelson Mandela as nothing but a common terrorist. Nelson Mandela, one of the most loved individuals that ever walked this earth, was for Margaret Thatcher nothing but a common terrorist. She supported apartheid in South Africa until its last day, and I have no doubt went to her death continuing to believe that apartheid South Africa was what she described in 1988 as a vibrant, multicultural society. That's Thatcher's take on apartheid. Now, it would be enough about her if it wasn't for the fact that Major, Blair, Brown and Cameron have continued her political philosophy and ideology. The idea that public is bad, private is good, that the state must shrink, except when it comes to paying for your funeral, £10 million. I mean, she loved privatisation so much. Couldn't they have privatised this funeral? Couldn't they have put it out to tender? Invited sponsors? Maybe Burger King could have put the logo on our coffin as it headed for the crematorium. Maybe McDonald's, Coca-Cola, I'm sure they'd have been happy to pay for the privilege. But instead, you're paying for it. Our pensioners who just shivered through the longest and coldest winter for 50 years are paying for it. Our young people who can't afford to go to university, their parents are paying for it. You're paying for it. But the philosophy that private is good and public is bad is the prevailing philosophy that has persisted since she was forced out of office after the poll tax riots in central London 30 years ago. I had to calculate quickly there because I was there also. I was on the platform in Trafalgar Square actually speaking when London burst into flames all around me. As first one building in Northumberland Avenue and then many others leapt into fire. And the posh shops and the Ritz Hotel, funnily enough, where she died. Imagine. Somebody dies in the Ritz Hotel where they've been living for months, but you got to pay for their funeral. The Ritz Hotel was laid siege to by angry people from the north, from the Midlands, from South Wales, who'd come to London to raise their voices against the iniquity, medieval iniquity of the poll tax. She was forced from office, but her ideas have continued. And that's where we come in. That's why we're still standing and fighting. Because it's not enough to see the end of Thatcher. We have to see the end of Thatcherism. Until we, as a country, recalculate our place in the world, then we are not going to get out of this hole that these people put us in. When Thatcher came to office, the financial sector represented 3% of the British economy. Just before the crash in 2008, the bank collapsed. Financial services accounted for 40% of our national economic activity. And that's the problem. Because that statistic is testament to two things. First of all, that our manufacturing capacity continued to plummet after Thatcher's 35% destruction, and we continued to prioritize an economy built on financial services, property markets, and the credit debt bubble, all of which has now burst, leaving us with neither one thing nor the other. And that's why we're in the hole that we're in. But our role in the world does not just stretch to our economic activity. Thatcher's period began. I don't know if there's anybody here old enough, maybe one or two, to remember when Harold Wilson refused to join the United States in the war in Vietnam. He had no quarrel, he said, with the people of Vietnam, millions of whom were killed by the United States in the 1960s and 70s. We went from that period of a real Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, refusing to join an American war, to British Prime Ministers egging the United States on, pushing them on, in some cases, Mrs. Thatcher with the imbecile Reagan, Tony Blair with the imbecile Bush, acting as their brains, using their muscles, American muscle, British brains, idiot presidents, wicked British Prime Ministers. And you all know the results. I don't have to spell them out to an audience such as this. 1 million people perished in Iraq. I say this, there was a Labour man here, but he shook my hand and left. I don't know if there are any others still in the room. But I know that some will be watching on this live feed that my comrade Elias is filming now. And I have to say, to anyone still in Labour, anyone still voting Labour, how are you going to answer on the judgment day that you continue to give your support to a party that killed 1 million people in Iraq? Imagine what 1 million dead Iraqis would look like. Imagine them piled up outside this room. Imagine the mountain of dead people that 1 million dead Iraqis represents. And then tell me, never mind tell the Almighty on the last day, how you could continue to support the people who did that. How you could continue to vote for the people who committed that crime, who killed hundreds of thousands in Afghanistan, to punish them because Osama bin Laden was once there, even though it was them who sent Osama bin Laden there in the first place. It was them who paid for him to go there and gave him the weapons that he used there, punishing the Afghans twice. First, they suffered because he was there, sent by the West. Then they suffered again because he was there. And now, as Mark was just saying, whilst talking about an upcoming meeting, this war has spread to Pakistan, which in any case paid a very high price for the Thatcher-Reagan policy in Afghanistan in the 1980s. It's now being not just paying a high price, it's now being bombed. Imagine. Pakistan is a strategic ally of the United States and the United Kingdom. And yet the United States and the United Kingdom are bombing them and killing their people. And they don't even have the courage to send their pilots to do it. They do it by a drone, an unmanned vehicle, controlled by a man in a suit, thousands of miles away. If any of you have seen the movie Syriana, you know what a drone is. A man in a suit in Washington is watching on a TV screen and pressing a button and utterly eviscerating to nothingness the people in the car or the house. They did it again in Afghanistan just a few days ago. They said there was a Taliban leader in the house. It didn't matter, there were also 10 small children in the house, and his wife. Press the button, destroy the house, kill the children, kill the wife, as long as you get the Taliban. The same Taliban that they helped into power in the first place. You couldn't make this up. as a tale of wickedness. It's too far-fetched. And they're doing it even across the border in Pakistan, in Yemen. They've given the technology to Israel to do the same in Gaza. I could go on and on, trust me, about all of this. Their crimes are almost without number. I was in Bradford this afternoon at a meeting of our Convoy to Kashmir group. In September of this year, I will lead a convoy, I hope, of hundreds of vehicles, all the way from Britain, all the way to Srinagar in Indian occupied Kashmir. Why is there an occupied Kashmir? Why have the Kashmiri people not had their right of self-determination, which was enshrined in a unanimous decision of the United Nations Security Council more than 55 years ago? Why has it never been implemented? Because there's no oil in Kashmir. There's no interest for the West. And the people dying there are only Muslims with brown faces. That's why they haven't lifted a finger to implement the United Nations resolution and to give the people of Kashmir the right of self-determination, which they have in every legal and moral sense. Why am I going to have to drive for 21 days, 5,500 miles, through France, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iran, Balochistan, Pakistan? Why am I going to have to do that? Because no one in Britain knows anything about Kashmir. And we have to raise this, do these things, to raise these types of issues. But why is there a problem in Kashmir? Because Britain ruled India and scuttled out, betrayed the people of Kashmir who were denied their right to choose where they wanted to go as a result of that partition. Why have the Palestinian people not yet got that which the United Nations voted for them to have in 1948? The United Nations voted, after much bullying and bribery and bludgeon, to create a state of Israel, yes, but also to create in 50% of the land a state of Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital. Why has that never been implemented? Because the victims are only Arabs, predominantly Muslim Arabs. And there's no oil in Palestine either. But there's real treasure in the strategic relationship between Britain and America and the state that they describe as Israel. I could go on. Britain once had an empire on which it was said the sun never set. It was so vast, our empire, that upon it the sun never set. Though, as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. Our role in the world, the role of the state in our own country, the role of society, are the big questions in politics. And Yvonne was, I think, struggling not to be rude in a church with so many religious people present. So let me do it for her. If a backside could have three cheeks, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat are three cheeks of the same backside. They stand for exactly the same things. The same approach to the economy, the same approach to the wars, the same approach to nuclear weapons, the same approach to public spending cuts, unemployment. It's the same old, same old. Well, we stand for something different. A different Britain in the world and a different Britain at home. You see, Margaret Thatcher famously said, infamously actually, this is an apt point to end on in a church. She gave what I described at the time as the Sermon on the Mount. The Mount, Jesus gave one of his most famous, peace be upon him, gave one of his most famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount. Thatcher's Sermon on the Mount took place on the Mound in Edinburgh when she was addressing the Church of Scotland General Assembly. In that sermon, she said something unbelievable at the time. She said, "I hear all this talk from you church people about society. There is no such thing as society, only individuals." That's what she believed. No such thing, as Neil Kinnock put it, as us and always, just me and now. No such thing as honouring other people's mother and father. No such thing as cherishing other people's children. No us and always, just me and now. Me and now. That's the difference between these people and us. We believe in society. We believe in community. We believe in unity between communities and within communities. We believe in fairness and justice and equality for all. That's what respect is. And that's why I hope you'll join it.
Thank you, George, very much. It's a very rare thing in politics to see someone who will take the side of the oppressed against the oppressor, who will never take the side of imperialism against its victims, who will never take the side of the rich and powerful against the poorest. And George has eloquently expressed what respect is. Respect is a party that will take sides and will speak the truth regardless of the consequences. So I hope you will listen to George's appeal that there are sides to be taken in this struggle, and I hope you will join us in that struggle. I hope you'll stay and join us for some food. I just want to ask one